What's up, fellas? I believe this is question answering thing number 34. I appreciate all the participation. I didn't get very many questions in the last one, so I put up a community thing on YouTube, and then I put up a story on Instagram and got lots of participation, which always makes me feel good. So thank you guys for participating. It means a lot to me. And as always, if you have any questions you would like answered next week or whenever I do the next one, leave them in the comments of this video and I will get to them in the next one. So we'll go through all three sources of our questions. So last video, the community poll, and then Instagram. Got a lot of them, so I'll probably answer some of them a little bit shorter and go into a little bit less detail than I often do. If you need elaboration, just let me know and I'll either address it in the following one, or I will make a plan to make a dedicated video to it if it's something that really needs a lot of fleshing out. So that's kind of the plan. We'll get into the questions now. The first one is, hey man, how do you approach your peaking blocks? Do you practice singles for a specific number of weeks? Thank you. Keep up the good work. That's a great question. I'm going to give you the wonderful answer of it depends. Some people at any given time are within a reasonable striking distance of hitting a 1RM. They only need one or two touches of heavy singles in that 90 to 95% range before they are prepared to hit a single at 100, 101, 102%. Other people, whether it be due to mental hurdles, whether it be due to technical faults, will need a larger priming period of practicing the sport-specific singles. So it largely depends on the athlete, how many weeks they're going to have to be hitting singles for, how long they're going to have to spend in that 85+% range. Some people need very little time spent there because their neural efficiency is just good by nature, and most of their time is better spent building muscle. And then other people, on the other hand, are coming in with a decent muscular base, or they grow easily, so they can afford to spend more time in that high percentile range and getting really skillful at the sport because hypertrophy is going to happen for them regardless. The other thing is I keep in my accessories just about through the end. I just taper off or I increase the proximity to failure. So they're not going quite as close to failure, but they're keeping in the movement patterns that their bodies become accustomed to. I find that when you drop off all your pulling volume, so on and so forth, these accessories, this certain amount of volume that your body has become accustomed to across the training cycle, you drop them all off in the hopes of dropping fatigue. A lot of people end up kind of stiffening up, and their recovery actually feels worse because they're moving a little bit less blood. They're moving through these less range of motion per day. Motion is lotion and whatnot. So instead, to reduce fatigue, we'll make they're comically far from failure, right? So we're going 5+ reps in reserve, but that way we're going to get some of the movement benefit without necessarily accruing much fatigue at all. So that's something that's unique about how I usually will approach a peaking phase, is keeping in a reasonable amount of accessory work and just making the proximity to failure really far. The next one is, how would you approach training grip strength for a lifter that has been using straps on his deadlift for a long time? Thank you for the info in these videos. You're welcome. I would say it depends on your goals. If your goals are you want to compete in powerlifting, so the only thing that matters to you is your raw deadlift, just stop using the straps. Even if that means that you're going to be using significantly less weight than you were. We might go through a brief detraining period for our back, our hamstrings, the stuff other than our grip, because our weights are so inherently limited by our grip. But I wouldn't really worry about it, because what matters is how much you can pull without the straps. Even if there's a little bit of detraining that might occur in the primary movers and the back musculature, retraining happens really quickly, and as soon as you're able to hold on to the appropriate weights, that retraining process will happen quite quickly. So I mean, if your goal is just to maximize your strapless pull, just stop using them. If you pull hook grip, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, but if you pull mixed grip, it really comes down to just take them off, bite the ego. You'll work your way back up to the weights that your back and your hamstrings are demanding, and wouldn't worry about the detraining because it'll come back really quickly. If you use hook grip, basically the rule of thumb is do as much as physically possible without the straps. At some point, they're going to be necessary. All of the best hook grip pullers use straps at some point in their program. So I'd be foolish to tell you to never use straps if you're a hook grip guy. But I would tell you that people are very, very overly dependent on them, and they'll justify it in their head as smart training practice, when in reality, if we look at just the nature of specificity of what we're asked to do, which is pull without straps, a lot of people do overutilize them and hide behind the fact that they're a hook grip puller to justify the ratio of strapped to unstrapped work that they're doing. I hope that helps. I think that including something that challenges your grip, so something where the limiting factor is your grip, can be included daily. Grip can be trained at a relatively high frequency because it's a smaller muscle group. It doesn't get nearly as banged up as something larger. So just including one thing per day where the limiting factor is your grip goes a long way in rapidly building grip strength, whether it just be the use of fat grips, whether it be a pulling motion without straps if your grip is that bad where you're always going to be limited by your grip. It could be something like a dead hang for time with or without weight. The beauty of those is they're very easy on the central nervous system. You're not really axially loading. If anything, you're doing the opposite. So you can add those in with basically not much additional systemic fatigue. So if you need a little bit of extra work, dead hangs are wonderful. All these other things work. Challenge the grip often if you really want to bring it up faster. The next question is, where do exercises like calf raises and biceps curls come into the programming for strength? So calf raises are an interesting one because sometimes I'll actually include those first. We talk about, the best way to improve mobility through the hamstring is to load it through a full range of motion, develop strength in those full ranges of motion, and suddenly you're not so stiff. You're able to enter positions where you have strength. It's usually your body limiting you from entering a range of motion because of a perceived lack of strength or stability or whatever you want to call it. And we all kind of agree on this. Like, training through full range of motion is just as efficacious as stretching is. We've had some recent studies to support this notion. But for some reason, ankles are not considered part of this. Training the surrounding musculature through a full range of motion isn't enough. We need these banded distraction ankle stretches when we haven't really tried the equivalent, which is just training calves through a full range of motion at a reasonably high frequency. So for people who struggle with ankle mobility, I might include calves first. It's an old bodybuilding thing to train your calves before you do your squatting to get your ankles loosened up. It tends to work. It tends to drive lasting mobility changes. You don't tend to get some ankle pain like when you really aggressively statically stretch. So maybe that could be a totally different spot of its own. It's things that are included in the warm-up to prime ourselves to maximize our performance on the main lift. But yeah, bicep curls, not even tertiary because it's not hypertrophy work for a primary mover. It's hypertrophy work for a stabilizing muscle at best. So I would say that's just kind of something to throw at the end when you see fit. I think the idea of, we train our biceps because they're an important stabilizer in the bench press is a little bit misled because whatever the demands on the biceps are in the bench press, however large they are, they're not that large, they're going to be sufficiently met by the overlap of all our pulling motions. Our back training is going to lead to whatever amount of strength you need in your biceps to bench well is going to be gained by doing sufficient pulling volume to drive upper back strength, right? So it's like that is kind of already a checked box. So including extra curls can be just for elbow health. It can be for wrist strength, strengthen your wrist extensors, or it could just be, fluff work to have big arms because everybody wants big arms and there's nothing wrong with that. Algo, love the vids, man. I'm a fucking boomer, so it took me a long ass time to figure out who the fuck is this Algo guy? Figured it out. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. I didn't really think about how important comments were for driving engagement on the channel, but I appreciate it. You guys are wiser than I am. Okay, so that finishes up the ones on the video. I'm going to move on to the community poll where you guys asked a lot, which I really appreciate. I'll try to move through these at a pretty decent speed because there's a lot of them and I don't want this video to end up being like a full-ass podcast type thing. Is floor press beneficial for increasing the bench? My sticking point is when the arms are parallel to the floor, which is the same as floor press. It makes sense in my head, but I'd decay if it actually helps. It can be helpful. I will tell you, if you're not an advanced lifter, generally speaking, you don't need very much partial range of motion training. If you're developing your chest, you're developing your front delts, you're developing your triceps, and on some level you're developing your back, that's going to be better done through a full range of motion. Just putting on more muscle, your bench will go up and up and up. I usually tell people, unless you're at a certain level, I might not worry about what specifically of those three is the limiting factor. No, just train through a full range of motion, push your volume, push your frequency. Everybody has a sticking point. This idea that that you shouldn't have a sticking point is bizarre to me because it's like you can't just never fail. You're going to fail somewhere. And failing at one point in the lift versus another isn't inherently worse or better necessarily. I will tell you, generally speaking, where you fail isn't actually where you lost. You lost your bar speed below where you fail. So oftentimes if you're missing, wherever you find your your upper arm to be parallel with the floor, more than likely the bar speed was lost below that. So focusing on power off the chest may well help just as much. Just developing your pecs may well help just as much. I don't want to tell you it's a bad exercise, especially as an accessory for overhead. I think it's phenomenal for strongmen. I think it's phenomenal. In the case of powerlifting, I think that if you look at most of the current highest level benchers, there's not a lot of floor pressing, and there's not even that much partials going on. It's just pushing whatever the appropriate amount of volume is for the person's strength and recovery capabilities, pushing the frequencies, getting technically skilled, and trying to hypertrophy the relevant musculature. I wouldn't necessarily try to go about attacking sticking points via partials. I just don't think, more often than not, it's misused rather than used well. So that would be my advice. Is probably that's not how I would recommend going about it. Not to say that people who go about it that way are wrong always. I'm having a hard time keeping everything tight and in the right position to start the deadlift, which is forcing me to work on my form using lighter weights. In the meantime, do you think it'd be beneficial to train accessories that target the deadlift musculature harder than usual to compensate for the loss of intensity in the deadlift? Or should I keep going in the program, set my ego aside, and stop fucking worrying? Oh, man, you're asking me a tough question there, man. I would tell you, you should stick out. If it's your first, he says he's running Candido's linear program. If it's your first time running the program, I might stick it out as written. I always think you should run through the program once verbatim vanilla, making no modifications so you truly understand how it works, whether if you're weak at a certain time, is it because the program isn't working, or is it because you're fatigued like you're supposed to be, so on and so forth. But I like your idea, to be honest. I think that if you are having to compromise your intensity on the primary lifts to below what's actually going to drive adaptation to practice your form, that just leaves you with more energy to attack the accessories that are targeting the relevant musculature. I think that's very similar to how we approach Max's training blocks. The beginning of the block, when we're laying our foundation, the proximity to failure on his squats it's not even close, right? It's not within 3 reps of reserve of failure. It's not within 4 reps in reserve of failure. So it's sub 6 work. So you could say, oh, well, that's not driving meaningful adaptation. Well, what we're doing is we're laying our motor patterns for the block. We're accumulating volume in the pattern that we really ideally want our squats to look like. And then he's got the extra energy to go push himself really hard on the exercises that we're using to target the relevant musculature. So I think that the reason you're doing it is a little bit different, because you're like, oh, I need to get my form in line so it doesn't bang me up. It's perfectly reasonable. And I think it's wonderful in the meantime to use that additional energy to build up the musculature. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I wouldn't just completely disregard the program, but I think that is a very reasonable idea. And I think similarly a lot of the time. The next question is 6 sets of benching per week enough for chest for an intermediate lifter? I can add more volume, but if I do so, upper body days will last forever since I bench and overhead press twice per week. 6 sets per week, I would say, is definitely on the low end. Maybe, I don't know your program, right? If you're doing a lot of dumbbell benching or flat pressing or chest work, that can make sense in a program if you're doing a lot of other accessory work. But I would say more than likely, if you're actually an intermediate and you're not a really strong guy, I would say that you should probably ramp that up, even if it means decreasing your proximity to failure, so dropping the reps at a fixed load or dropping the load at a fixed reps, so that way you can take shorter rest times, so that way your sessions don't last forever like you mentioned. I think that pushing a little bit more workload than that more than likely is going to benefit you, but I don't know your specifics, so I can't say that with absolute confidence. What are some really good ways to attack back hypertrophy without driving up axial loading with things like barbell rows? Can a predominantly low impact machine-based back regimen do the context within the context of powerlifting and strongman? So that's a great question. You'll find that really, really strong guys, if you look at the absolute strongest deadlifters, many of them are doing very, very little barbell rowing. I've heard guys like Luke Richardson and Andy Bolton talk about the fact that basically when you're exotically strong like that, one of the most finite resources you have is the recovery of your lower back. And if you're doing heavy squats and heavy deadlifts in a week, more than likely you've already topped out that recovery capabilities of your lower back. Your lats could probably handle more, maybe your hamstrings could handle more, but your lower back is almost topped out. So there's very little wiggle room to include an accessory that taps into that really valuable resource that could potentially be used doing more squatting or deadlifting or other event training. So basically, what does that mean? It means Andy Bolton's talked about how he does most of his rowing in some sort of chest supported fashion on machines. If you watch Eddie Hall's training, back in the day when he was pushing towards his world record, the vast majority of his back training outside of the deadlift itself was performed with a chest support or a vertical pull, so we're not adding any more significant amount of axial loading. So I would say that's absolutely a real thing. It can work very well as long as you're honestly topping out with the squatting and the deadlifting. If you're just like, if you don't like them necessarily and you're kind of not wanting to do that many work sets per week, and then just throwing in a bunch of non-axially loaded stuff, well, we need to be axially strong, unfortunately, right? Which, leads to our lower back being sore a lot of the time. But I would say that if whatever your level is, whatever your strength level is, whatever your technical efficiency is, as long as you're topping out the amount of deadlifting pattern, hinging pattern, and squatting pattern that you can, and then using the chest supported, machine-based regimen that you're talking about to top that off, absolutely appropriate. I program it for a lot of my athletes, just to work around that obvious restriction of, hey, we only have so many sets we can do where we're loading the lower back heavily. Nothing wrong with it. If you look at a lot of good powerlifters and strongmen, that seems to be the approach they take with their upper back training. That being said, if you're someone who knows that it's a weakness, maybe shying away from it isn't always a good idea, and we should be challenging our lower back anytime we're doing a row, as long as you're able to recover on some level. Kind of a complicated answer. I hope you kind of got the gist of it. I think it's a good idea generally. What's your recommendation for bench press grip width? I know there's not one grip for everyone, but it seems most elite benchers are pretty close or moderate. I disagree with you. Most of the best heavyweight untested guys are close to moderate, right? More than likely, I don't know you, you probably aren't a giant man on steroids. If you look at most of the best, especially natural benchers in your weight class, more than likely they're benching with a wider grip. I've always liked the proposal that Eric Spoto had, not that he's some megamind brainiac, but he obviously has a pretty good understanding of benching. He says on some level your grip width should be proportional to your arch, so the more that you can arch, the wider you're able to take your grip, basically because by the wider we take our grip, the more mechanically challenging the bottommost range of motion is, and by arching we remove the bottommost range of motion, so we kind of get this synergistic effect of like, okay, we bring it out so that way we're really strong through the upper 3/4 of the lift, and then we arch well and we remove the bottom 1/4 of the lift. That tends to be a very mechanically efficient pattern. If you look at bigger guys who aren't able to arch as much, they need to bring in that grip to generate sufficient power off the chest. That's why you'll see most of them will miss at lockout at a very high levels, because they're using that closer grip where they're more powerful off the chest. So I would tell you, obviously just whatever works best for you, try it out. I bench closer even back when I could arch better. I've always benched closer because it let me handle more training volume and it carried over to other presses more. And I care a lot about general pressing strength, not just specific displays of strength on the bench press itself. So I like it to carry to my overhead. I like it to carry over to my dips, my incline, and find a closer grip, generally speaking, with a greater range of motion, carries over better. So it's goal dependent. You have to try what works for you, but I would give you the general piece of advice that take a look. If you got a pretty big arch, more than likely with some training, a wide grip might be quite beneficial for you. If you're someone who really, really struggles to get into a quality arch, that grip might need to be closer. So, like I said, remember who it is you're looking at, right? If you're not a big guy, copying big guys' form isn't always the best idea. Looking at people with similar leverages and body weights to you can be quite beneficial for kind of figuring out what might work for you. Do you ever spend a block or two cutting? No, you can tell that by looking at me. No, I don't. I would like to focus on maximizing my strength for the time being. At some point in time, I would like to get lean again because it's nice and the quality of life is nice. But in the meantime, I think I owe it to myself to try to get as strong as I can. Next question. How should I go about programming 2 heavy squat days and heavy deadlift day within a week? A lot of that comes down to how you're built. You know, some people will be built in such a way that squatting doesn't beat them up that much and deadlifting kills them if they've got short limbs. Or on the other side of the coin, you have people who are long limbed. Squats really bury them in terms of fatigue, and deadlifts don't really bury them, as well as like how technically efficient you are. I would say you've got a couple options. You could go, you know, squat, rest, deadlift, rest, something like that. You could go squat and deadlift together, give yourself a couple of days of rest, and then do the other squat day to put some space in between. Remember that lifts don't always have to be done in competition order. I know it doesn't always feel great, but you know, guys like Jamal Browner have had really good success using reverse SBD days, so DBS days, basically to switch the inherent prioritization of whatever comes first in the workout is, you know, going to get the best work. So if we always do SBD days or squat deadlift days, squats are always on the less important side of the spectrum, and they're getting the least quality work just by the nature of being last. So we can reverse that order. There's nothing special about the order other than the inherent meat specificity. So if you reverse that order, we can have a day where deadlifts are the highest priority. So there's nothing wrong with if you did a deadlift and squat day later in the week and a squat day earlier in the week. So you have one day where you're prioritizing the deadlift and one day where you're prioritizing the squat. It's something you can play around with. I think there's a lot of different combinations. You could combine them if you need more rest days between the sessions, or you could just space them out. I would say any of those things work. If you're really struggling with it, shoot me a message on Instagram. I'd be happy to talk it over with you and let you know at least what I think. Not saying I can solve it for you, but for the longest time, what I did is I went squat, bench, deadlift, bench, and then my secondary squat day, knowing that my performance was going to be hindered on that secondary squat day. But I already have one day where squats are, you know, the first thing in the week. They're going to be the highest priority. I've got one day where deadlifts are the priority. And then that secondary squat day is just kind of running up additional volume and frequency. Okay, serious question though. Probably very naive. Any tips for managing blood pressure? Okay, so there's a lot of answers to that one. The first one I will tell you is to go watch the Stan Efferding high blood pressure quick fix kit video on YouTube. He talks about some nutritional strategies as far as dropping your blood pressure, making sure you're getting sufficient calcium, making sure you're getting sufficient magnesium and potassium, all of which can help. Maintaining a good hydration status, drinking enough water through the day can help. Making sure your sleep is good can help. Dropping body weight can help if you're, you know, overly fat. Keeping yourself in good cardiovascular shape can help greatly. You know, just being accountable for doing some sort of aerobic activity 4 to 6 days per week. Just being in good shape goes a really long way as far as blood pressure management. Having beetroot powder can help. Having L-citrulline in your water through the day can help. Both of those are vasodilators. So by dilating our blood vessels, right, the systemic pressure lessens. All of those things can help. If you are really struggling with it, or you're, you know, a fat guy who's going to be fat for the sort of foreseeable future, or you're a guy on gear and you don't want to necessarily go get a prescription for blood pressure meds, Cartitone, you can just buy it on Amazon, had it at morning and night, can do wonders for dropping you down at least towards that 120/80 mark. It's a little expensive, but it's not that expensive, and you can't really put a price on your health. So you owe it to yourself and anyone who likes you even remotely, if you are on gear, to pay for anything to mitigate those, you know, negative symptoms that you're having or side effects. And the Cartitone does work quite well. And if none of that works and you're monitoring your blood pressure at morning and night, probably 3 readings through the day and taking an average, which is what you should be doing, none of those things work, go get a prescription. If you've got insurance, go get a prescription. It's worth it. It might have very small negative impacts on your strength training, but the positive benefits of your longevity in terms of being healthy will outweigh the negatives in terms of your end result as far as what's the highest level of strength you ever achieve. I hope that helps, kind of rambly. I'm very sorry this isn't quite as coherent as my usual ones. Been a long day of coaching for me, so I'm a little bit tired, but I hope that I can give some at least quality information and some people actually watch it. Bench and strict press goals, short-term and long-term. Do you like doing them? Favorite Pokemon, also generation/league. Okay, bench press and strict press goals. Well, this block I would like to do 560 bench press for a 5-pound PR. I would like to do a 380 overhead press. I don't know what the fuck I just said. I would like to do a 560 bench press, 5-pound PR, and a 380 overhead press for a 5-pound PR. I just aim for 5 pounds a block. I believe that's a reasonable rate of progression for someone at my level. Long term, I don't really know. I would like to bench press 600, overhead press 405, although I don't really see any reason why I couldn't do more. If I take things as far as they need to be taken, I believe I'm capable of more than that, given sufficient time. If I give myself a decade, I don't see any reason why I couldn't be notably past those numbers potentially. Do you like doing them? Yeah, I like doing them. I like doing most exercises. I like lifting weights a lot. Favorite Pokemon, Wooper, thus the YouTube icon. And then favorite generation. That's a brutal question for me. Based on nostalgia, I want to say Generation 2 because the first Pokemon game I played was Pokemon Silver on the Game Boy Color. Gen 3 is wonderful. I got a soft spot for Gen 4 because I liked Gen 4 as well. I'll probably go with Gen 2 just for the sake of nostalgia. But thank you for the Pokemon question. That's fun. This video is probably running pretty long. I think I'll probably have to do another one of these, I'm assuming. So thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate that you guys watch my videos. I don't know why. Please let me know if you have any questions and I'll get to them in the next one.